Hi, I'm Kate Lehman, and this is my final project for EDL 853. It's case study, Get This Child Out of My Room. First of all, what do we know about this case study? There was a lot of information given. The most important things to me were, first of all, we're dealing with a special education child, Carl, and he is exhibiting aggressive behaviors. The behaviors are being so far just presented towards teachers, the people that have helped on the bus, and then his classroom teacher. This child is also in third grade. The child's teacher wants him out of the classroom because she feels like he is making the environment unsafe for herself and the other children. Mrs. Taylor, the third grade teacher, has put most of the pressure on Mrs. Green, who is a first-year special education teacher. Mrs. Green believes that Carl's IEP is working effectively because Mrs. Taylor made it clear that more needs to be done. Mrs. Green is now working to rewrite parts of the IEP, and she's also working on getting the parents in order to have a meeting. So a couple other things. We also know that the parents just got a divorce 3 months ago and that Carl's not handling it very well. What do we need to know? There were a bunch of things that I think that would be helpful to know. First of all, did the previous educator, special education teacher, really just stick kids in the detention room? They had mentioned at the end of the scenario that the teacher that retired before Mrs. Green started had been there for 25 years and had done a really, really good job. But then they had said if there was ever a behavior, she took the child, stuck him in the detention room with a workbook, and never looked back. My next question is, has Mrs. Taylor made a consistent and a true effort to follow through with the original IEP? And lastly, does Ms. Taylor collaborate with any of the teachers, or is she just putting the pressure on Mrs. Green? In the district I work, if we don't collaborate with the special education teacher first, we don't get to rewrite any IEPs or anything like that. We've got to make a true and consistent effort for at least 30 days with the original IEP before we can talk to the special education teacher, administrators, or parents again. It would be helpful to know if that is something that's happened. So, what's our main problem? To put it broadly, a child has an IEP in place, and the IEP is not working to the teacher's satisfaction. The current special education teacher is working very hard to communicate with the classroom teacher in order to find a solution that benefits everybody. However, the classroom teachers don't seem to be really communicating back with the special education teachers. In my opinion, there's also a shortage of administration in the district. To only have your superintendent in the building once a week is really not enough time, in my opinion. Lastly, the child in question comes from a home where there doesn't appear to be a lot of love right now, and that might not seem like a big deal, but for the kids, especially a third grade child, that's a lot, you know. If their parents just split, that's a really, really big life change. So, what I would do if I was the principal, first and foremost, I would try and come up with a way to make my special education teacher and my classroom teacher communicate a little bit better. Whether that means sending them to some trainings together or doing a team building exercise with them or just telling them that, hey, before you guys come to me, you have to communicate with each other. It doesn't matter what plan of action I come up with for this child. If my classroom teachers aren't communicating, it's never going to work. I would also do weekly checks with the classroom teacher to make sure that she's correctly implementing the new IEP. Like I mentioned before, I'm not sure how hard she tried to make the last IEP work. And like I said, we can't just keep changing this child's course of action. We need to stick with one thing and make sure that, see if it'll work before we try and change it. I also think that the new written IEP is a really good idea. And by implementing it, maybe Carl will realize how many outbursts he's having. Sometimes these kids feel so out of control that they don't know that they're doing it so often. They might think they had a really good day when in reality they've had 5 or 6 outbursts that have caused danger to other people in the classroom. I think the next important thing is after we have got Carl to understand that he's having these outbursts, we have to teach him how to manage his anger. Like I mentioned, I don't think he realizes how out of control he is. I'm guessing he acts this way at home with his parents, and they let it happen because they don't know how to deal with him. And so he's just letting that behavior carry over to the school. After we have Carl's outbursts limited and under control, I want to make sure he's in the classroom as much as possible. And I also think it'd be helpful to have a parent in there and have the parent there to, maybe recognize when he is having those aggressive behaviors and help support him and work through those issues. Throughout this whole process, I would really like to figure out what's triggering Carl. Is it certain classmates? Is it something the teacher does? Is it a certain subject? Is it happening more on Mondays than on Fridays? Is it anxiety? Things like that. Lastly, I think this is huge. We cannot just stick Carl in the detention room. As the principal in charge of the situation, I will make sure that doesn't happen. When you stick a behavior kid alone in a classroom with a book, the behavior kids just won the battle because now they've gotten away from the teacher, away from their peers, and really probably don't have to do any of the work if they don't want to. We've got to figure out something besides just isolating the student. I would also really like to find a male adult to do weekly activities with Carl. I'm not sure how much Dad's in the picture. It was seeming as though during the IEP meeting, Mom mentioned that Dad hasn't seen the child in a long time. I want that child to have a strong male influence in his life. So if we could find a para, maybe a bus driver, a custodian, somebody that this child can spend an hour a week with doing just anything really, talking about different types of things. And then very last, I think that it's important that we make Carl's family aware of different counseling options they could utilize, whether it's, a whole family one and how they can work through the divorce, whether it's just the mother and child going. I think that some counseling would really, really help this family. In order to implement all of these changes, the first thing we have to do is communicate. I have got to get my special education teacher, my classroom teacher, and myself, and the child, and the parents all on the same page. And sometimes that can be really difficult to do, especially if you have a hard time contacting your parents. You might have to catch them when they're picking the child up from school or when they're in the grocery store. And I know that sounds terrible, but sometimes that's the only way to get parents to know what's going on at school because they just don't come to meetings like they're supposed to. If we use a strike system with Carl, like the new IEP states that we might, it's very important that Carl understands exactly how he gets strikes. What behavior will get a strike, what behavior won't get a strike, and then we've got to be consistent. If he gets away with something the next day, we can't give him a strike for it the next time and expect him to understand why he messed up. Consistency is going to be key with this child. Lastly, it'll be helpful if the parents understand what we're doing at school and can use some type of similar system at home. Now, in reality, will that probably happen? No. But it would be nice for them to at least have the information and know exactly how we are dealing with Carl's behaviors at the school. In promoting the success for all of the students, by using a strike system, we're giving Carl chances to stay in the classroom and exhibit good behavior. We might say at 1 strike, you have to go to your own area in the classroom. At 2 strikes, you have to leave the classroom because you're just making it too safe for the other students. And if he is aggressive in the classroom, he needs to leave. We can't have third graders throwing things because you'll poke an eye out. It's just not safe. By having him leave the classroom, we're protecting the other students and the teacher in the classroom. And we're also getting Carl out of the room so he can go figure out how to calm himself down. Lastly, by getting Carl a male role model, we are showing him how males should act or react in certain situations. And hopefully this can be an adult that just stays with Carl throughout his entire education, or at least through his elementary, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade years, while he kind of works through his parents' divorce. What is best for the students involved? I think the best thing for Carl is to leave him in the classroom as much as possible. This is a child that's already being isolated because the teacher's already very clearly upset with him and has made it very clear and probably makes it clear in the classroom. His dad has, for the most part, left the picture, and mom works all the time. This child needs to be around influences, positive peer, teacher, peer influences. That's very important. However, we have to keep the other students in the classroom safe, which means if he does exhibit the behaviors, he needs to leave. And Carl needs to realize that the anger is in him and that he needs to leave the classroom. Lastly, I think coming up with a way to help Carl with his anger management will give him the lifelong skills that he needs. The social emotional ticket of it is really important. My personal thoughts, feelings, and values. Well, the very first thought I had was that Carl's dad at the meeting appeared to be very, very aggressive, and mom appeared to be a little bit aggressive too. Aggression, in my opinion, is learned behavior, so it makes sense that Carl's acting out. He's seen this aggression at home, and when children see this aggression at home, they're going to use it at school. It's just the cycle. That gave me a much better understanding of why Carl was having the thoughts and feelings he was having. I also was a little bit disappointed in the classroom teacher. I don't think she tried very hard to cooperate with the special education teacher. And as an administrator, that kind of bugs me because I like to think that I have teachers in the classroom that are working with the special education teacher. As a teacher right now, I feel like the success of my special education students is entirely on me. And if they're not succeeding, it's my job just as much as it's the special education teacher's job to figure out what's going on with that kid and what we can make a plan to do. I don't usually go tell the special education teacher that the plan isn't working unless I have 2 to 3 ideas on how to make a new plan work. It's critical that the education teacher works with the special education teacher to find a new plan. And lastly, the saying goes that the toughest children are usually the ones that are most loved. Carl obviously needs some more love in his life. He is being aggressive because he has no idea how else to act right now. He is going through a huge life change, and he's lashing out at teachers because the teacher can't leave him like the parents did. Children come to school either to learn and then be loved, or to love and then learn. And this child is clearly coming to school to love and then learn. So we've got to meet that need first, or else he'll never learn. And then lastly, I think this district in general has a lot of room to grow when it comes to writing IEPs and implementing them really from the ground up, from the teacher to the special education teacher to the administration to the parents. The whole process in general didn't go near as smoothly as I think it could have, and probably it will in the future. And I think largely that has to do with not having more administration in the building. It's hard to hold everybody accountable when there's no one there to make sure they're doing their job. Unresolved issues. The first issue is, what was the consequence when Carl was throwing pencils and rocks the first time? I mean, did we just let him get away with that? Because then that makes sense as to why he keeps acting out, because we've let him act out this whole entire time. The next thing, we don't have a ton of positive incorporated into Carl's IEP. That would be my next step, especially as an administration, was to make sure that if Carl went a whole day without an outburst, he gets to go to the prize box, or he gets to be first on the lunch line, or he gets to earn 5 extra minutes of recess for the whole entire class. And if he can't make his one-day goal, then we need to lower it to, can he make it before lunch with no outbursts? Can he make it before first period with no outbursts? We need to track how many outbursts he's having and then make a time frame that makes sense to help him succeed. And then lastly, I would really love if we could find a more consistent way for the administration to be in the building more often. And I know we're in a small district that is covering, in a large area, but there needs to be somebody there, whether it's an assistant superintendent, a principal, but that needs to be their main job title, and they need to be in the building more often. How did I demonstrate a sense of integrity and ethical behavior that serves as a model for all members of the school? I believe that by not allowing Carl to be isolated when he acts out, we demonstrated a sense of integrity. I think that by trying to find a male role model to mentor Carl, we made an ethical decision. And lastly, by having our staff work together to collaborate on a plan for Carl, we hold our district to the highest ethical standards possible. And also, I would believe by being more ethical is by not putting Carl alone in a room. That, to me, you should never do that to a child. How did I promote the effective and efficient management of the school district? As a leader, I promoted effective and efficient management in several different ways. By requiring my staff to work together, we worked as a team. Even though I'm only building once a week, it is important that while I am there, I make a visit in as many classrooms as possible to make sure that all classrooms are running smoothly. And lastly, I think it's important that I lead by example when promoting effective and efficient management. How I manage my staff will be a big part of how my staff manages their classroom. And if I were to say, Mrs. Taylor, Mrs. Green, you did a terrible job, go sit in the corner. That's how I can expect them to manage their classroom. They'll say, so-and-so, you've done a terrible job, go sit in the corner. And that's what that child's going to do. So I need to lead by example. And that's all I have. Thank you.